I just want to mention we've been, going through this passage in Genesis, and God has really so much to say to us in these chapters, in these ancient stories. And we looked at Joseph's dysfunctional family, and we saw that God is not bashful about entering into relationship with fallen people to accomplish His plans, and that's good news because we all have families and we all have issues, and He works in and through deeply damaged people to redeem them. And it's like He enters into the soap opera, okay? And we have a soap opera here in Genesis, a little bit. Chapter 37 showed the depth of hatred that Joseph's brothers had. Simeon and Levi schemed to kill him. Judah worked to save him by suggesting they sell him off into slavery. And then this favored son, 17 years old, goes down to Egypt as a slave. And we heard Judah's, I almost said Yoda, we totally different story, totally different saga. We heard Judah's story and his descent, okay? He has this downward skid, but despite all that, Tamar saves the family line. Could have disappeared altogether, but she saves it. And in the unfolding of that story, she also forces him to acknowledge how far he's fallen. And that is a moment, that's the beginning of the transformation in his life. And thank God that He specializes in that, right? Transformation. Joseph spent many painful years. He spent many painful years in Egypt. Okay, I want you to understand. Through it all, though, God is with him. He's with him in Potiphar's house. He's with him in prison. He is shaping him and preparing him. Now, as we get into this story deeper, I want to invite you this morning. It's hard because we know this story, okay? We know this story. We know Joseph. Joseph had to go through it. Joseph had to live it. And so, I want to invite you to enter into the story and just, there's a lot that we know because the narrator tells us. And then we kind of know the end of the story. But Joseph had to get up and go through Monday and go through Tuesday and not know necessarily what was coming. All right? That's the reality. And so God blesses Joseph at like every turn, in his life as a slave, as a prisoner. It says that God blessed him. But that does not mean that He gave him a life of ease. Okay? You think of the loneliness, the betrayal, the waiting. If you think of Joseph thinking about his family, and he's like, my dad is a wealthy man. Where's the search party? He's right along trade routes. He doesn't hear anything. He doesn't hear about, the son has disappeared and be on the lookout or whatever. He doesn't hear any of that. I mean, we know that Jacob is under the impression that his favorite son's been eaten by a wild animal. Think about what it would be like to be going through this. Silence from his family, the painful moments of, the painful memories of the last moments he spent with his brothers. And I mean, if you think about it, what Joseph does over the years is he assimilates. He becomes Egyptian. Learns the language. He moves on with his life. Okay, he's not stuck. He moves on. Now he still honors God. He sees God at work during those years and of no real resolution relationally. So smart though. He learns Egyptian. He learns from the different challenges and the different places where God puts him and leader. I mean, talk about leadership in adversity. Not just enduring, but running Potiphar's household. Not just surviving in prison, but running the prison. Okay. And as Pharaoh elevates him, makes him the second in command of all Egypt, he's managing the most powerful country at the time in the known world. That's how high he's been elevated. And Joseph came to oversee the years of plenty so that they could handle the years of famine. Building the warehouses, building the storage facilities, putting in the infrastructure. Those things didn't exist, and he does that. And again, this is something we know about, this famine. God told Pharaoh through a dream, tells Joseph through that dream about his plans. The rest of the ancient Near East didn't know anything about this. They just were going along and very happy to have some bumper crops. The rest of the world did not stop to develop strategic stores of grain. So for 7 years, Joseph unfolds this plan to maximize this time of plenty. Now, if you think about, everyone gets the advice to set up an emergency fund, right? That was the first thing I told Gordon when he moved away. I said, you need to set up an emergency fund. I said, the government's going to shut down at some point. And you need to be able to pay yourself a little bit. And, he's actually one of the types of people who took that very seriously. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't do that, okay? And so, what if I told you that the next 7 years would just be amazing? You would make all kinds of money. But then the 7 years after, you wouldn't earn a dime. I mean, if you believe that was the case, it would affect how you lived. It would affect how you saved. It would affect what you have. Okay. And Joseph did that across the whole nation of Egypt. And he started in this role. He's 30 years old. He did this for 7 years. And you can imagine he got pretty established in that. He was good at it. He was good at it. And yes, everything he did well, and with God's blessing. And it's the same thing here. And then what happens is the famine begins. And Joseph and Pharaoh are okay. They're happy with how they've prepared for all this. The people of Egypt are okay. They're actually more than okay. Plenty of food. And honestly, in that world, plenty of food meant security. Life is good. Life is good. And after the 7 fat years, the famine begins. And it's not automatic. It's not like a stock crash necessarily. A famine comes it takes a little while to evidence itself. You have a bad crop, and then you have a failed crop followed by worse crops, and suddenly there's a crisis in the whole region, and everyone begins to feel it. That's what was going on at the end of chapter 41. There's this description of God's providence and His provision, and it says, so with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouses and distributed grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt. And people from all around came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. And part of what God is doing is he's put Joseph in a position where he can save many people, including his own family. And so those are some of the facts in the unfolding of the larger story. And I want to look now at chapter 42, because here is this encounter that God brings about between Joseph and his brothers. And if you want to turn to chapter 42, I'd invite you to do that. I'm going to kind of walk us through it, and then talk about what we see there. The story picks up with Jacob seeing that Egypt has grain, okay? He can see the caravans along the trade routes going down hungry and coming back with bulging bags filled with grain. He sees it. And the word is that Egypt has plenty of resources to sell. And I said before that, Jacob's a wealthy man. And he's like, what are we saving it for? Let's use some money and buy some food. Let's feed some people. Okay, so it's kind of funny the way he says it to his sons. He's like, what are you guys standing around looking at each other for? Load up, suit up, go to Egypt, get going, go get some food, or people are going to die. Go to Egypt, buy grain before we starve to death. And he sends them out. Sends his sons. He doesn't send all of them. He holds Benjamin back. Benjamin, by this time, you got to understand, Benjamin's like 30. but Jacob's like, no, Benjamin, I need you here. I need you at home. I need you right here by my side. Dad is determined not to let anything happen to this guy. He is determined not to make the same mistake that he made when he sent Joseph out. Okay? Stuff happens. Things go sideways. And he's like, I'm not going to do that again. My son, Benjamin, is going to stay put. It says that Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. And, these were the guys that pounced on him, right? These were the guys that stripped him of his coat. These were the guys that roughed him up, that plotted options for how to finally rid themselves of the dreamer. And it's this posse that arrives in Egypt. They take a number. There's a long line of people who've come from all over to Egypt to get grain, and they get online, and they're waiting to see the guy in charge, and that's the setting. That's the setting, and these guys come in, and they find themselves face to face with Joseph, who recognizes them immediately. Okay. Now, they come face to face with Joseph, but that doesn't mean that was the name on the plate on the door. Okay? He's got a different name. It's Zephanath Paneah. We're not even familiar with it. They saw an Egyptian name. This guy had power. This guy knew what he was doing. He was in charge. He had the signet ring of Pharaoh. He could put his, it was like the auto pen. He could sign for the Pharaoh with authority. It was a big deal. And he didn't look like Joseph. He didn't sound like Joseph. He was, and he wasn't the 17-year-old that they had thrown into the cistern or that they had farmed out. He's more like 40 at this point. His beard is shaved, his head is shaved, and prominent Egyptians, used a little makeup, a little eyeliner. And these guys, as far as they were concerned, all they knew was that they had to kind of get past the prime minister of Egypt, give them their bags of silver, and get the food and go home and start cooking. That's what was going on. But what happens is God sovereignly brings them together. And Joseph was not necessarily expecting it. We know in the reading of the story what happens, but suddenly there's this day that they walk into the room. Joseph wasn't necessarily expecting it. It was definitely not on the brothers' radar. They thought they had seen the last of him. And I kind of wonder, are there people in our lives that we just as soon not run into at CVS? But that's kind of what happened. I mean, it's a lot more formal. It was a lot bigger deal. But you know what I'm saying. That's why I invited you to enter into the story, because this is no small encounter. You guys know who Corrie ten Boom is? Corrie ten Boom was in a concentration camp for hiding Jews in the Netherlands, and they threw her and her sister in concentration camp. And they're Christian, strong Christian family, and she was the only one, I think, in the family to survive. And she gets out, and her faith is on fire, and she's got just this amazing story. She's got this amazing testimony, and she would often go around and she would tell that story. And she'd talk about God's faithfulness and his provision and his forgiveness and all this stuff. And there's a story I remember one time, see if I can say it without crying. One time she looked and she saw one of the nasty, nasty SS guards out there listening to the gospel. And she's like, what? She recognized him. He didn't necessarily recognize her. But there she is talking about God's forgiveness. She's talking about the grace of God. She's talking about get a clean slate, all this stuff. And wow, that'll test you. That'll test you. How do you react? So, like I said, Joseph immediately recognizes his brothers, and they didn't recognize him at all. And of course, the dreams come back, the sheaves bowing and all that stuff. There they are, bowing. And imagine the feelings. Imagine the vindication. Imagine the impulse to act. He's got the power. He's got the power. He can bring down the hammer. And Joseph does something curious. What he does is he challenges them. He says, you are spies. You're trying to spy out the land. You're trying to figure out where we're weak. And he puts out feelers, and of course they react, but he's putting out feelers because he wants to know, are these the same jokers as 20 years ago? Are these the same guys that did him dirty 20 years ago? Huge reversal from the last time they were together. Because, they were so harsh to him. And Joseph's harsh to them. It's not that he's setting them up for some revenge move. It has a lot more to do with the role that he's playing. But imagine the feeling in the room. Imagine the power I'm sure it was not some gutted out room. It was probably an opulent sort of room that this number two guy in the world power of the time is there, and they are groveling, getting accused of being spies. The guards are there, the interpreters are there, there's a whole line of people, and it's intense. And how ironic, since up to this point they've been a disaster, but their defense is, we're honest men. That's how they respond to Joseph. They're like, you gotta believe us. We are honest men. We're good guys. Simeon and Levi had killed a whole town's worth of men. Reuben and Judah were like a dumpster fire. This whole time they've been lying to their dad, who is just dying inside, right? He's dying of mourning, and they live with this lie quietly. And it's ironic they're accused of spying because, what are they going to do? Go back and tell their father something? And so, as part of their defense, what they do is they tell more of their story. They're like, sir, there are actually 12 of us. We're all brothers, sons of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back with our father, and one of our brothers is no more. How many years Joseph was away? Probably wondering, how's Benjamin doing with these guys? What are they doing to Benjamin? Because they knew Dad liked to favor. They knew Dad liked to favor Rachel's children. And Joseph wasn't wrong. He knew his brothers, at least years ago, and he knew the life he could give Benjamin in Egypt. It would be amazing, opulent. How does he even know Benjamin's alive, other than these liars say, these honest men say that he is? He doesn't know that. That's what's going on. And so Joseph says, no, you're spies. He says, guards, seize them. He throws them all in prison. And he says, guys, this is how I'm going to test your story. You're never going to leave here unless you bring me your youngest brother. And he lets them cool their heels. He actually says, I'll let you send one of you can go back and get your brother. Imagine how that goes with Jacob, right? But he says, he's your ticket out. If you don't bring your brother, your youngest brother back, you're not getting out. And he sends him off to prison. 3 days they sit in prison, and they think, and they worry, and they freak out. I don't know if you've had conflict with people that you wouldn't mind putting in prison. Some of us have. Some of us have had people try to ruin us. And again, this is not a story of revenge. This is about seeing if they've changed. So what happens is those 3 days, you know what it also does is it gives Joseph time to think. And he's softened a bit. And of course, he knows the reason they've come is that everyone in Jacob's household is starving to death. And he doesn't necessarily want to jam up the process of getting them food, so he changes things a little bit. He wants to, everyone in the entire household needs food, and he wants to provide for them. So he said, listen, guys, he comes back 3 days later, he says, I'm a God-fearing man. If you do what I say, you'll live. And he said, if you're really honest men, we'll choose one of your brothers to stay here in prison. And you guys can all go back. But you bring back don't bring him back, you don't get the last brother. It's quite a deposit. And they kind of erupt in all sorts of panic amongst themselves, and they say to each other, we're being punished for what we did to Joseph. We're being punished from years ago, and we saw his anguish. We heard him plead for his life, and we wouldn't listen. They're acknowledging that, and that's why we're in this trouble. That's why we have to answer for his blood. Now, Reuben's not helpful because he's like, I told you so. Guys, I told you we shouldn't have done this. Thanks. I appreciate that insight. I told you we shouldn't have done that to Joseph, but you wouldn't listen. I mean, what great leadership from the eldest. During all this time that they're saying these things, Joseph is right there. But they think this Egyptian probably doesn't speak Hebrew. Well, of course, Joseph knows everything they're saying. They've been using an interpreter up to this point. But they confess to each other the hardness of heart. They confess to the guilt over selling Joseph out. And do you know what it does is it hits Joseph. It hits Joseph because he had to excuse himself. He realizes the prison that they've been in. He realizes the guilt in how they've treated him. They realize their culpability. And it's awesome because what happens is God brings them together and he provides room for expressing that, even leaving some room for resolution. And Joseph has to excuse himself because he breaks down. He cries. And I think what this shows us is that this is not an easy thing for him to be confronted with these guys. Even as much power as he's got, even as many options as he has. His heart is torn. There's enough brokenness that Joseph is right in wondering, in being curious about whether they've really changed over the years. And so what he does is he takes one of the brothers. Who does he select? Simeon. And I've told you some stories about Simeon. He's like the most damaged goods in the box. Okay? He is the one of them that is most easily abandoned. He is the one easiest to walk away from, easiest to and what Joseph does is he says him. They just sort of jump on him and they tie him right in front of the brothers and they walk him off. And here's the thing, if Simeon rots in an Egyptian prison for years, he kind of has it coming. He's a murderer. He's a wannabe killer. He's not a good guy. Joseph sends the rest of them back home, and what they do next will tell him everything that he needs to know. So P.S. he slips the money back into the grain, and so they leave with all these big bags of grain, and the silver, all the money that they paid is in the bags of grain. And at some point, it says that one of them opens up to feed the donkey, and finds the bag of money. And it's like, uh-oh, we've been saying we're honest men. And did we, and they start freaking out again because they're like, God is setting us up. God is setting us up to be wiped out when we have to go back. Do we have to go back? I guess. But do we have to? You know, and that's what's going on in their minds. So when they get home, they relay this whole story to Jacob about this guy who was really rough with them, and that by the way, Simeon is in jail, and he's going to stay there unless you send Benjamin. Jacob is like, you could forget that plan. That's not going to happen. I would just write Simeon off. He doesn't quite say it that way, but it's like there is no way he's letting Benjamin go. He won't let Benjamin go do anything. He's so protective. And he says, first Joseph and now Simeon, you guys are robbing me of my children. I'm not going to give you Benjamin. You can forget it. No way, no how. And Reuben again steps in like he was dropped on his head or something, and he says, he takes another stab at leading, but it's awkward and weird. And he's like, listen, we'll take Benjamin, but if anything happens to him, you can kill my two sons. And it's sort of like, well, what did they have to do with anything? And P.S., you're the one still living with a lie as to why Joseph's not in his bunk. I'm not sure what it helps to kill it was Jacob going to say, oh, bring in my grandkids and let me kill them. No. It's like bonkers. But it doesn't matter because Joseph's not going with that plan. He said, no way, never. And so he addresses the other 9 sons, which this probably wasn't super affirming. But he's like, Joseph's dead, and Benjamin is all I have left. He's the only son I have left. And they're like, should we do a 23andMe? I don't know. But they are feeling like as much chopped liver. Okay. And that's the chapter. That's how it ends. And the story it obviously advances in the next chapter. But this is sort of what we need to think through. Why is this in here this way? What's going on here? I want to tell you what I so appreciate about this particular moment in the saga. Joseph has been through it, and we see that. We know that relationally, relational brokenness between him and his brothers. That sounds understated, right? But the story acknowledges it, and it's not a matter of Joseph saying, "Hey guys, I'm okay." And it's not just that he's being harsh to get back at them, and it's not that he's trying to put the fear of God into them. He's processing. He's feeling it. He weeps. How many of us get to the point where we weep over the broken relationships in our lives? Because that's where Joseph is. He's confronted with an encounter with these knuckleheads. And he could have just wiped them out. He could have just ignored them. He could have just taken their money, and he could have given them the grain, satisfied that he's helping his family, and let's just try to keep some distance. Don't want to really get involved. I'll take their silver. Here's your grain. But he's trying to figure out if these guys, are these the same guys as they were 20 years ago? Or will they be moved to mercy for their brother Simeon? If they have any mercy. Are they willing to rescue him? Joseph could have been bitter about all that happened, all these he suffered in Egypt. He calls it the land of his suffering. It would be easy for him to point back to being sold out and sold off as the source of all those difficulties. And we know, because we're outside the story, that God's been involved here as well. And he's the one who sent Joseph to Egypt. He's the one who brings the brothers back into his life. And what Joseph is doing is he's wrestling. And he's leaving room for them to show some change. And it's like he's rooting for them. And at the same time, it's like he's leaving. The possibility exists that they haven't changed, that they won't change. And that would influence how Joseph relates to them, or how he's oriented toward them. This is a story of forgiveness, but it's not a story of quick forgiveness. It's not a story of rushed forgiveness. And I remember when I was growing up, there were four boys, and we were kind of knuckleheads too. Not kill each other knuckleheads, but we, and there were times that my dad would grab one of us and another, and he would, he'd say, "You need to ask for forgiveness." And we weren't the least bit repentant. But he'd be like, "Do it." Okay. Will you forgive me? And then the guy that heard it had to be like, "Oh, yeah, he's not the least bit repentant." My dad would say, "Now you say you forgive him." And I'm not trying to harp on my dad or whatever. But I think do you understand that story? It's like that, there are times that we're faced with a situation where it's like we're supposed to forgive. And if we call that forgiveness, there's a lack of integrity to it. All right. A wee bit controversial, even talking about the name. But Charlie Kirk's widow stood up in the memorial a couple weeks ago and said that she's forgiven the killer of her husband. And, love your enemies, right? And I give a lot of credit in the sense that, being able to even utter that. And of course, Donald Trump stood up moments later and said, "I hate my enemies," which is like, you won't find that, but. And I'm in no way critical of Erica Kirk's sentiment. As a pastor, I was sort of like, I've been around people who've gone through funerals, and there's a numbness that lasts for a little bit in a normal death. Did you feel it? I felt it. I think that's actually a bit of God's mercy sometimes. Sort of like shock if you cut off your hand or whatever, God "Oh, you're not going to remember this. You just need to get some help." There's numbness, and I know the sorting out that it's going to take for quite some time, even to come to terms with the loss. And my dad would say, "Well, I forgive him. I forgive," someone, he would regularly he would do business or whatever. Some guy would, mess him over for $7,000 or $10,000 or whatever. He's like, "Oh, I forgive him." Ooh, maybe we could send the Swedish mafia over and rough them up a little better, persuade them. And he said, "No, I forgive him." He said, "I might have to forgive him tomorrow too." Because what happens is you wake up and you're like, "Oh man, I could use $10,000 or whatever." So I do think that sometimes we forgive in steps. We have to sort through the stuff that we've experienced, and we've got to feel it. And sometimes our motivation is not to feel it. Okay? That's why people drink a lot. That's why people use all sorts of stuff. Or sometimes they immerse themselves in work or whatever it is. Sometimes we have to feel it, the loss, the pain, and we need to forgive and to let go of the resentment and the urge for revenge. And Joseph's showing us that here. And he's doing it in a slow way. And I appreciate that. To give it back to the Lord. And it's important for us to do that too, to give it back to the Lord so that we're not filled with rage and spite and whatever it is. Because what happens is if we don't deal with it, do you know what that stuff does? I mean, there's a toxic quality. I would say it's almost like a poisonous seed. It's a seed in that it can stay dormant, and then it can come out after a couple of years like, I've been waiting for this. And then, of course, you've heard the saying, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It's true, we need to let it go. Now, that does not necessarily, forgiveness does not necessarily restore broken relationships, but it does put us in a position to experience healing. Broken relationships can be restored. The gospel is about reconciliation. It's about coming back. It's about being brought back, not because we earn it, not because we deserve it. Jesus died to bring us back. He set us free to bring. His heart is to bring healing and to bring a flourishing life. And so our message every week is that God has forgiven us because of Jesus. And he's at work redeeming us, and he's committed to do that in so many other lives. And again, not because we deserve it. That is grace. That is a gift. It is undeserved, unmerited. But here's the thing. Because he forgives, we can forgive. Because he gives grace, we can receive grace, and we can extend grace. I'm not sure I know some of what some of you have gone through, but I don't know everything, all the hurts. I don't know the trigger points. I don't know the buttons. I know hurt people, so sometimes we're the giver, sometimes we're the receiver. So many times in life what we do is we plot ahead and just don't deal with it. And I think this chapter slows us down a little bit and invites us, rather than to stuff it and to ignore it or to, whatever. I suppose on the other hand, you can embrace victimhood. Are there hurts in your life that stir up hate? What God invites you to do is to let that go and to give that to him. And sometimes God engineers encounters like Joseph and his brothers where we're almost, he puts it on the agenda. It's like it invites us to process life's pain. And he did that in Joseph's life, and he did that in the brothers' lives. The question is, are you open to experience that in your life? Is there a situation that you think of that comes to mind when you say, oh, I don't want to deal with that? Who is it that if you saw them would just set your teeth on edge? they showed back up in your world? Would you be emotionally ready to engage? It might be that God wants to set you free. He wants to help you let go. Some kinds of abuse, I just want to say, some kinds of abuse are such that wide boundaries need to remain in place. That's okay. I recognize that. But what I want to show you is what I see in this passage is a multi-step process. And I think sometimes forgiveness is like that. Sometimes reconciliation is like that. And I know what I would like is to be able to pray and to just pray and then it goes away. And I don't mean to say just pray in a way to diminish the power of prayer. I'm saying that there's integrity in what Joseph is going through and the fact that he's troubled and he weeps and he wrestles. And it's just significant to me that God works in that brokenness. And he's working on both sides, with Joseph and the brothers. I literally hear crickets. That's hilarious. Where do you need that healing? Where do you need that healing? Is it okay if it's a little messy? Or if it takes a while? Because God heals, and he does it in all sorts of ways. Sometimes he does it in an instant. The Gospels have many stories of that. Sometimes he does it in a more drawn-out manner, and that's kind of the regular manner of things, I think. Like when you break a bone, God can heal it immediately. But a lot of times it's going to involve a cast and some time and some crutches or whatever. It's often how it is. But he still heals, and he's still committed to that, mending over, maybe sometimes over a longer period. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to come to the table. And after the service, if you want to talk, if you want to pray, I'm here. So let's pray. Lord Jesus, as we come before you, we bring our hearts. We bring hearts in various stages of hardness and softness. We ask that you would continue to soften us. Some are hurting, and we ask that you'd heal those hearts. And I pray for our relationships. I pray for the relationships that need healing. I pray for the hurts that we need to give over to you. I pray for grace not just to let the calluses thicken, but help us not to just press on and ignore. I pray that you'd surprise us with your goodness, surprise us with your power to heal. Lord, we thank you for never giving up on us. Thank you for caring about every aspect of our lives. Thank you for, it says in your word that you are near the brokenhearted. And we thank you that you come through by your Spirit. And we pray that you'd heal our hearts, heal our relationships. Thank you for your commitment to restore all things. Help us to trust you in and to follow you in that, to be involved in that process, to be willing to experience that. Thank you for your forgiveness through your blood and for all you've done in saving us. We continue to give ourselves to you, and we ask that you'd let our lives reflect the grace and mercy that you've shown with such generosity. In Jesus' name. We have a song, right? Would you stand? And then after the song, we'll come to the table.
Savior